Hello, and welcome to the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute's Value-Added Marketing Series. My name is Jason Robinson, Director of Business Development for Food for AURI. Our mission is to accelerate the expansion of the agricultural economy by empowering expanded uses and markets of agriculturally derived products. Today, we have Hailey Margetta, a Minnesota-based banker, educator, and business owner. Over the next few minutes, Hailey and I will discuss the importance of effective market research for institutions making funding decisions on value-added agriculture businesses. Hailey, welcome to AURI's Value-Added Marketing Series.
So my name is Hailey Margetta, and I'm a banker, an educator, and a business owner. I've spent the last decade plus working with ag-related businesses, and so I'm happy to be here to talk about how market research can help them get funding. Your market research is how you can tell your story. It proves that your project or your service or your company has viability. It also helps whether you're seeking a grant, you're looking for an equity investment, or you're looking for a loan, right? It's going to help the person looking at your business reduce risk because you're providing them data. And it's also informing them of your strategy. So when you take those three things and you put them together, right? That's what the market research piece is for. It's extremely important. Anyone who does a great job of market research is more likely to get funding than if they don't. When we talk about what market research you should provide, it really needs to get granular. Okay, so when I say what industry are you in, that's the first thing you need to establish for either your reader, maybe they're reviewing your grant application, or maybe you're speaking to someone. So the other thing that you want to put in there when you're describing your industry is commodities. Not everyone who's reviewing your grant application or whatever funding you're seeking is familiar with commodities. So talk about what commodities that your business deals with, talk about the supply chain, talk about whether or not you're hedging, talk about the price of commodities from a historical and a future standpoint. Yes, some of this intertwines with business, right? Like your industry and your market research intertwines with your business specifically, but that has to be very, very clear. The third thing I would say is economic fluctuations. So I want you to describe to me in your market research, how sensitive is your business or your product line or your project or solution to economic fluctuations, to cyclicality, to inflation. And another one I would add there is also seasonality. Many of our ag businesses, obviously, are seasonal either in their selling process or in their production process. So that needs to be outlined within the research because, again, market research is super important because of viability, reduces risk, and it's informing strategy. So as we're writing our research, as we're doing our research, that's what's informing our lens. The other thing, a couple other things on the research side I want to point out is if you have export exposure, again, since we're talking about commodity ag-based businesses, we want to think about that and talking about that in our research. Government policy and regulation is a big one that should be included if it's relevant to what you're doing. And, some things others don't think about always, but that's starting to become more important is social and environmental impacts. We need to be including that. We need to be talking about our global footprint and how we're reducing that and how that could potentially impact our supply chains for better or worse. Two more, I would say, changes in consumer confidence. These are big picture themes, but this should be included in your research. Because even though you might say, well, I supply to wholesalers or I supply to another corporation, your end user is always a person. Okay, so that is why changes in consumer confidence and the way consumer behavior changes is important to you and important to the person reading your market research. Finally, I would just say, think through, you might not want to put this directly in your research, but where is your industry in its life cycle? Are you in the growth stage? Are you in maturity phase? Are you in decline phase? There are multiple phases to an industry's life cycle, and it's important that you outline to your reader. Think about electronic vehicles. I know it's not ag-based, but these are in their infancy, right? Growing. Versus the fax machine, right? That's a declining industry. You want to help your reader understand where is this industry within its cycle. So it was a long-winded answer, but I was trying to pick out some very specific things instead of going really general on where you should focus when you're doing market research. The data is important, but remember, data is your starting point to tell that compelling story. So whenever I'm looking at, again, in my many facets, a grant application, a loan request, an investment request, I always want to start with your market size. So what you can do here is start really general. Again, maybe you're a protein-based company or you're a soybean farmer, right? So you have this big market, and then we want to whittle it down to where exactly you're playing in that market. Then you want to include what the historical and future growth rate of that market is. So I really want to see those data points to start off the bat, because this is framing for the reader or the reviewer, how big and how compelling is this opportunity? I think you should spend some time focusing on your customer demographics. Again, I understand the customer isn't always an individual like me or you, it may be another business. But the reality is, if you're selling a value-added product into a business, there is a consumer at some point on the other end buying that. The next thing I like to see is detailed analysis and data on competition. Who are your competitors? How many are there? So is this a highly fragmented market, or is this a market where just a few people control the industry? And a good example of that would be with smartphones, right? Apple and Samsung can control the pricing of these gadgets versus restaurants. You know, there's a million restaurants. So I want to see data about the competition. And I also want to see how the applicant in question is competing and positioning themselves in the market relative to their competition. And two other things I would say, again, commodity info, we just talked about that with research, but price charts and graphs that are showing what is the price of, whether it's a certain fruit or a nut or dairy or whatever it is. Your reader may not always be familiar with that, so putting a lot of data in on how those have been consumed and produced and prices is really important. And then the last thing I'd say is with respect to supply, production, supply chain. We're going to group that all together for purposes of this call. If you have data on your suppliers, again, are they diverse? Is there just one? If you're buying sunflowers, you know, you're buying it from a handful of players, but CHS is a really big one supplying that market. Like, we want to know who is supplying you and what risks lurk in your supply chain. So any data related to that is really important. Again, your industry will inform how detailed you go on the data points, but I think I gave 5 bullet points, are a really good starting place. Do not use AI, please. Do not use AI to create your entire grant application. We read a lot of grant applications and it shows, but I would say do use AI to inform yourself, where maybe you have a question or you want to become more of an expert at something, and then use that as the basis with which you think about what you're putting in your application. Be very concise in how you write these applications. Brevity is your friend. Finally, don't be afraid to have someone review your application before you submit it. That's particularly helpful in catching typos and run-on sentences and unfinished thoughts, because I know that the folks who are applying for these grants, they're busy. They're doing a lot of stuff. And sometimes it's hard to catch those things, but it's important that when you're submitting material asking for money, that information is as clean as it can possibly be. Just when you're writing your market research, it can be a slog. There's so much data. And again, if you're privately held, it can be really hard to find some of this key concrete information. But just remember, the market research section is really, it's your area to tell your story and to make it as compelling as possible. And keeping in mind those 3 themes that we talked about at the beginning, right? So we want to prove that the viability of your project is there. You've demonstrated there's a clear problem and that you have a clear solution that's going to solve it.
Well, Hailey, thank you so much for your time. Your comments have been incredibly enlightening, and AURI just wants to say thank you, and we appreciate it. And thank you, viewers, for joining us today in AURI's Value-Added Marketing Series to learn about the value of market research in making funding decisions. Have a great day.